So I just finished watching the new Batman show, Batman Caped Crusader. Now I've been pretty excited for this show since it was announced because it reminded me a lot of BTAS from the trailers. And while I don't think the show is the greatest thing in the world, I was still really happy with what we got from it. But before I start this video, if you have any disagreements or criticisms with the show or this video, then make sure to come onto our Disagreement Day streams. We try to do them every week or so, but join my Discord to stay updated on when we do those. And without further ado, let's begin this breakdown of what I like and dislike. So starting with episode 1, I like how right off the bat it sets the tone of Batman still being like that myth that criminals don't even know is real or not. This has obviously been done before, but it's always been one of my favorite areas of Batman to be explored, and it's one of the reasons Arkham Origins is my favorite Arkham game. Unfortunately, Roger Craig Smith doesn't voice Batman in this show, but the guy who voices Batman still does a really good job either way. I'm a big fan of how he's able to turn on and off his Bruce Wayne and Batman voice. It does kind of remind me of how easily Kevin Conroy seemed to be able to do it, so props to him on that. The show also immediately sets the stage with some good world building, establishing Barbara as a lawyer and Jim Gordon as the commissioner, who a lot of people want to see fail because he's one of the few good cops. Harvey Dent is running for mayor, and both Barbara and Jim clearly not liking him very much. And I like this scene between Barbara and Harvey showing off how Harvey is someone who will get the criminals off the street no matter how harsh the punishment is, even if they don't deserve one so harsh. And Barbara knows that the kid didn't really do anything too bad, and she's more empathetic towards people who just did something bad, stemming from a bad situation. And there's a gang war brewing between the Penguin and Rupert Thorne. But moving on, I really like how Bruce quickly puts up his rich playboy persona, as he makes a fake mess to go investigate what Penguin is doing, but as he's investigating, the Cobblepot family walks in, and he has to leave. And I like how once Bruce gets back on the boat, he says, "Guess it's not a yacht party till someone goes overboard," once to Barbara and then another time to two people who ask him what happened, just subtly showing how fake this persona that Bruce puts up is. Then Oswald the Cobblepot confronts one of her kids on the fact that she knows he ratted her out, and she winds up drowning her own child, quickly establishing, damn, this bitch don't fuck around. This leads to her other child, Ronnie, leaving the yacht party in fear, trying to phone Rupert Thorne about how his mother killed the wrong son, and Thorne leaves him in the dust on his own. He goes to Barbara because he knows that Jim Gordon is the only cop in town who isn't corrupt, and before opening the door, she grabs a bat because she's Batgirl. I'm sorry. Ronnie proceeds to explain that his mother killed his brother, and that he needs to get to Gordon, which leads to a chase between the Penguin's mob and Barbara and Ronnie. Batman saves them, but as Barbara and Ronnie meet with Jim, they tell him the details of Penguin's operation. They realize that Penguin may be trying to blow up the police precinct, but this does lead me to a problem that I have with the first episode. Batman knows that Penguin has something on the boat, and after the party, he decides to go out on patrol instead of heading to the boat immediately, like he does later, which leads him to saving Barbara and Ronnie, as well as Penguin blowing up the precinct before Batman could stop it. I just don't understand the reason why Batman wasn't already headed to the boat in his submarine after he left the party. But I will say, during this whole chaos, a moment I like is how when everyone in the precinct is being evacuated, we see that Bullock leaves some suspect there locked up in handcuffs, just a subtle detail showing how selfish and corrupt he is. And by the end of the episode, I really like how once Batman gets a win, he doesn't really, because this is just the start of another gang war, and he says, "I lost, I can't let this happen again," foreshadowing pent-up anger for something that comes out later in the show. But before moving on to episode 2, I do gotta say, my other issue with this episode is just Penguin. I just wish they made Penguin more interesting. She's just really kind of boring. I still like the episode, but it's nothing crazy, but fortunately, every other episode after this is better. Moving on to episode 2, Bruce starts off by being questioned by Officer Montoya. He tries to bribe her out of questioning, testing her integrity as a cop. He tails her as she follows a case on a missing persons report, where she's struggling to try and figure out any leads, and she keeps screwing things up. Harvey walks over to Montoya trying to get her to bring in a suspect so that once again he can use it for his mayoral campaign, and she says she doesn't care about his campaign, and he gives a subtle threat to her saying she should care because she will want to be on his good side when he's elected, which I like as sort of foreshadowing that bad side of Harvey. But anyways, as Montoya and Batman continue the case, we learn how Basil Karlo had all the talent in the world, but the man was too ugly to get the lead role in a movie. He loved the girl he was working with, the same girl who's missing, but another man was getting in on her as he sat from the sidelines in both his career and trying to be with her in a relationship. Driven to do something about his appearance, he went to a doctor who was supposed to give him treatment, but the doctor was kind of giving him the runaround. We later find out that the procedure that Carlo underwent gave him the ability to shape his face into anything he wanted, and when this happened, he went to Yvonne to try to be with her, but she rejected him, making him want revenge on everyone who wronged him before, accepting the role that he had been cast in his whole career, as a villain. And I like how Yvonne just kind of throws all his trauma back in his face, and he snaps as Batman comes through to stop him, and it ends with Montoya telling Batman through the bug that he put on her that they aren't done with each other. This episode was really solid. It's not something that you haven't seen before, and personally I think BTAS told this story better, but it's still good and a different enough adaptation of Clayface overall. My only issue with this episode is the fact that Batman kicks Clayface and then just kind of stops and lets him run away when talking to the director. I don't know why he doesn't just use the bolas. This would have stopped Clayface a lot earlier in the episode, so I do think it's an issue with it. Anyways, moving on to episode 3, in the beginning of the episode, someone makes a rude remark about Bruce's mother, which leads him to punching the guy in the face. He's forced to go to therapy as opposed to being charged for the crime, and as Dr. Quinzel tries to pry him on this, we see how closed off Bruce is about his trauma. And I really like how she brings up how personas can be deceiving in response to Bruce saying, "Do I look like the kind of guy to do something like this usually?" And as she talks about repressed trauma, we cut to a scene where young Bruce is being questioned about the suspect who killed his parents. Another thing I like about the episode is how he won't even open up to Alfred in the car as he goes through his therapy file, seeing a note from the therapist saying, "See you next Tuesday." But he has a frustrated look on his face while reading this because he doesn't like talking about it, or people prying him on it. After this, we see how Selina is lagging behind on rent, and how she has a maid just like Bruce has a butler who takes care of them since their parents no longer can. And she takes inspiration from Batman and starts stealing a bunch of places in a costume. And I really like the kind of opposite parallel they show between the two. After this, we cut to a scene where Alfred is trying to talk to young Bruce as they drive home after the murder, but Bruce won't say anything. And this cuts to Bruce still not opening up to his trauma from his childhood to this therapist. She pries him on the fact that the things he does to keep up appearances are things that people use to cover up trauma, and how she sees Bruce with girl after girl, but never with just one girl. And it's because Bruce is scared of getting attached to people, which the beginning of the episode foreshadows with the fact that Selina brings up that Bruce has never taken her out. And it's followed up on when she kisses him and he seems to like it, but then pushes her off. Then, as Batman sits in the Batcave thinking about Selina, Alfred tries to get him some rest. He mentions that Bruce has appointments today, which Batman jumps up to, and instead of the therapist appointment that Alfred was talking about, he's headed to the museum, which is holding his mother's pearls for more Batman work to set up Selina for a trap. And when Alfred mentions the therapist appointment, Bruce rolls his eyes. And I really like the scene where Quinzel mentions how most people dump all their thoughts onto her normally, and that if she didn't know any better, then Bruce is telling the truth and that he really is this persona. But she does know better, and she knows that this isn't the case, and just that his walls that he puts up are too strong for her to break right now. And she offers to have Bruce continue their sessions so that she can help. But Bruce denies this, and Alfred tries to relay a similar message that it would be helpful to continue therapy, but Bruce shuts this down as well. And it cuts to a scene where Bruce is up in the middle of the night thinking about his parents being shot right in front of him, as he walks into Alfred's room telling him, "They will pay," in reference to all criminals. And the reason even Catwoman is such a problem to him is because his mom died from someone trying to steal her pearls. So even if Catwoman's just a jewelry thief, it affects Bruce a lot. Near the end of the episode, after Selina is shot in the leg by Flash, he tries to execute her, but Batman stops him, and when returning to the Batcave, Alfred says that the pictures of him fighting the cops might do more harm than good, but Batman doesn't care as he knows it sends a message. And as Alfred tries once again to mention the therapy, Bruce again shuts down any psychological help, cutting Alfred off, because he thinks Batman is good enough as his coping mechanism. And I also really like the irony of the fact that Bruce won't accept help or change right now in the form of therapy, leaving him to continue being Batman for vengeance, and Selina's maid steals the money from her, so as well leaving Selina in the same kind of boat. They both get a little ironic ending to this story. This episode is fantastic. I really like the character work done for both Selina and Bruce. As of the time I'm writing this script, and as of the time I finish the script, this is my favorite episode in the show. Episode 4 opens up with the repercussions of Batman beating up Bullock and Flash, as we hear differing opinions on Batman all over the news, as well as the mayor issuing a task force to take him down. The task force attempts to trap Batman by using decoy crimes to draw him out. This is a neat little reference to Batman Year 1, and I always did find this cool, and I honestly wish that a Batman video game tried to do something like this, as I think it could be really cool for like a game random crime system, kind of like how in Spider-Man 2 the hunters will jump you when you try to get tech or something. Anyways, ramble aside, during the Harley Quinn meeting with the cops, she mentions that a good piece of bait would be to get someone who's like Batman in a way, giving Flash and Bullock the idea to take out Firefly, who's mentally ill and has an obsession with fire. They try to use him as bait to get to Batman, the person who is trying to stop and does intrude on their corruption, and they wind up killing Firefly just to cover their own asses. I do wish they would have explored Firefly himself with a bit more depth, but I really think the main antagonist for this episode is Bullock and Flash, and Firefly fits really well in the world contextually and metatextually as a Batman fan, and how he's someone who's mentally ill who is abused so that his, condition and his mentality gets even worse in Gotham. And I really like how Gordon sees Batman saving kids and stops trying to hunt for him, and doesn't tell the reporter that he saw Batman in there. And the episode leaves off with the two corrupt cops winning in the end, which I think is really good. In episode 5, we get more from Harley Quinn, and we see that she is psychologically and physically tormenting, torturing, and brainwashing watching bad people, to donate money to charities before killing themselves. Barbara goes to talk to her client who was caught by Batman earlier in the episode and was one of Harley Quinn's patients, and after Barbara mentions her name, the guy has a manic episode and attempts to run away, almost killing himself trying to get back to her.
I have a friend, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, who'd probably do it
Harley Quinn?
Do you know her?
I don't know. Her name feels so good in my mouth.
You and me both, brother.
I've been really trying.
Barbara talks to Harley and asks about the man from last night. Harley says that she doesn't know anything about him really, and this makes Barbara suspicious. But when going to talk to her dad, she doesn't want to push too far immediately because she views Harley as a good friend. But her dad gives her advice that the truth is better than anything else, because then you can actually do something about it, which leads Barbara back to Harley. She walks into her office seeing a mess everywhere and Batman leaving the scene. Then she sees the appointment book that Batman was looking in and sees that Harley was lying to her. Batman and Barbara eventually wind up finding the place that Harley is keeping people, and this leads to Batman confronting Harley. And I really like the line where she asks how many criminals Batman will need to take out before he feels better about himself, and then she reveals that she knows he's Bruce Wayne. And I really like what they do with Harley in this show. She feels very different from most adaptations I've seen of her. She's trying to do good, but she's doing it in a really fucked up way, and in comparison to her other, like, anti-hero, I guess, adaptations, I think this has been one of my favorites. Anyways, as Barbara's trying to save Batman from the trap that Harley left him in, she winds up dying, quote-unquote, from falling. Batman tells Barbara her feelings made her reckless, not being very empathetic at first because that's just how Batman is right now. But then you can kind of tell that he understands Barbara's pain. And I think this is a really good scene. Moving on to episode 6, to start off this episode we have...
Is that a horse?
I'm not the audience for this. A horse with a gun? Who is this for?
Bruce goes to a library searching for information on the coat of arms symbol that the Horseman had, and finds out from a librarian that the symbol came from the Ghost Man. He was a loyalist who lost all his wealth gambling, but blamed it on the democracy that the country upheld, and started stealing from the poor people he deluded himself into thinking made him go broke. And when he was caught, they hung him for his crimes. Batman goes to the Heritage Hill mansion because Lucius is finalizing a deal on the home, and right before he arrives, Craddock is furious over the words the nephew spoke of him and how he's about to sell the property to a black man, as he calls him rabble. I gotta say, out of all the racist insults I've heard in my life, rabble has gotta be a very unique one. It's so creatively subtle, it's just funny. Anyways, Batman starts to fight him, but he's unable to touch him. But out of respect for Batman's fighting capabilities, he lets him walk away for now. When figuring how to beat the ghost from some guy, Batman has to fight Alfred, and he's put into a situation where he might have to kill Alfred. But he finds another way and saves him. And I really like how upset you can see him from Alfred almost dying. It's how you can tell, even though he like keeps it closed off and his emotions closed off, it's how you can tell how much he actually cares about Alfred. And at the end of the episode, we see Harvey calling Thorne for help, following up on the scene earlier in the episode and throughout the course of the episode, with how Harvey is slipping in the election polls. And I like the scene from earlier where Harvey is pressed by Rupert Thorne in his car, and Harvey mentions how he's trying to become mayor to stop corruption like Thorne. Thorne says, yeah, I know you've got morals, but DAs know all about compromise. Way I hear it, you pretty much wrote the book. Morality is on a slipping slope for most men. And I like how this shows the consequences of how Harvey has been handling this whole election campaign throughout. He does have morals and wants to do the right thing, but like Thorne says, he does make compromises. And that line from Thorne is also really good foreshadowing for what happens with Harvey later in the show. Anyways, to move on to episode 7, they continue this concept as well, with the argument between Barbara and Jim. Barbara being more empathetic to criminals that really aren't bad people, and they just make dumb mistakes from circumstance or something, while Jim is more cynical about things. And I like how this shows the difference between how Batman, Jim, Barbara, and Harvey all go about handling the corruption and criminal activity in the city throughout the course of the show. But then, after Jim Gordon almost gets shot, he's informed that there's a hit out on his life. And I really like how even with that, Jim is still sticking to his gun and trying to uphold the police force from any further corruption. And I also like the drama this creates between him and Barbara. But it eventually leads to Barbara convincing Jim that it's not just him he's putting at risk by trying to put this thing off. Then, as Jim is being transported to the safe house, they are ambushed by the assassins. They wind up making them fall off a cliff. I'm sure they'll walk it off. Then they get stranded from the bullet damage that the car just took, and they can't trust anyone to call for backup, and someone with them got shot and is losing a lot of blood. And I like how this continues the ongoing conflict between Jim and Barbara about their conflicting ideologies, about how Jim can be too cynical at points, as well as one of his other character flaws, where he's too by the book when it comes to police work, even though there is some situations where he shouldn't be in the city that he's working in, such as in the case of Batman. And I like the scene that touches upon how Barbara grew up in the suburban part of Gotham, so we kind of know where her ideology stems from and why she thinks people can be a product of their environment, rather than truly being fully bad people. And by the end of the episode, after a conflict almost ends in someone she thought she could trust trying to kill her, Barbara starts to understand more where her dad is coming from when talking to the guy that put a hit out on her life, despite the fact that she tried to get that guy the best deal he could because she didn't think that he was all bad. And I like how she kind of just sits with this for a second, not necessarily changing her view, but just more thinking about it. Moving to episode 8, we follow Bruce at a carnival where Harvey Dent is as well, trying to do right in the public eye to get back up in the polls. But as he's doing this, Rupert Thorne is there dangling that fact over his head, trying to launder his campaign support money through the carnival, because Harvey took the deal in an effort to win the election. As this is happening, children around the carnival are going missing due to a girl named Natalia, who has a condition that makes her take other people's energy out of their body so that she can survive herself. And she eventually loses control because of the power she gets from this. Bruce starts to look for one of the missing children, and this leads to the people at the carnival thinking he's a pedo.
Now pay attention, Pimpin. Pay attention, Pimpin. You're a pedophile. Prove me wrong. You're a pedophile. Prove me wrong. You're a pedophile. Prove me wrong.
And he gets knocked out for this. When he wakes up, he goes to the car to suit up, eventually finding Natalia's brother. And I like how her brother knows that this is wrong, but he has to do what he can to help his sister. But when he puts his foot down to say this is enough and that Natalia is going too far, Natalia snaps and paralyzes him, eventually causing him to die. Batman then starts to fight Natalia, only winning because he told her that she killed her brother, causing her to break down in emotion because she didn't mean to do that and now she'll be alone. And I really like the line where this kid that saved Batman says that he can leave her alone because she's a monster, and Batman can't because, well, 1, he won't just let her die, but also 2, because he sees how broken up she is about what she has done, and he doesn't treat her like a monster. He has empathy for her, and I like this subtle step towards character growth. And I think Batman also sees a bit of himself in Natalia as well. After this string of events, Harvey has enough of dealing with Thorne, and he changes the deal that he made and keeps one of his men in holding. And for this, he gets acid thrown on his face, and I really like how he has some development here and goes back to his morals to win the election. But in doing that, this leads to something much worse. Which brings us to episode 9, starting off with Harvey having a nightmare about people's reaction to his now deformed face. Ashamed of how he looks, he drops out of the race and quits his job as DA. And this is where Two-Face really starts to take effect. As he says they're all gonna pay for what they did to him, watching the announcement of the new DA and him not becoming mayor. Bruce goes to Harvey's house and notices that he's shut himself out on life and has been drinking it away. Bruce offers to take him out. Harvey is hesitant at first, but he eventually gets convinced by Bruce because he's his best friend. As they're out eating, he grows more and more insecure and uncomfortable about his injury, as Bruce tries to pry him on what happened and tell him that it's not all bad. Two people walk up to him, which makes Harvey's bad side come out and say what he really feels about them. And as the waiter approaches and asks if they're doing okay, Harvey finally snaps and takes off his bandages to reveal his face to everyone. He gets aggressive with the waiter again, telling her to ask, "Are you okay again?" which makes Bruce stop him. And after Bruce catches Harvey as he tries to punch him, Harvey snaps back to reality and runs out. As Batman is trying to figure out what happened to Harvey, Alfred asks him if it was worth it to bring out a broken man into public like he did, possibly making things worse. Batman replies with the fact that Harvey used to do this all the time to people to get to the end goal. And Alfred says that Bruce has to realize whatever he thinks Harvey was, that may not be who he is anymore. As Harvey is walking in the rain, he's fighting between the good part of himself and the bad part of himself. Reminiscing on what happened to him, he says the real monsters are the one who did this to him, and that he doesn't deserve any of this. But he then recognizes that he has done bad things, so he may have deserved what happened. But he asks himself, didn't he already pay for his sins with this? And mentions how while he's suffering right now, the people who did this to him are sitting pretty. And Harvey leans more towards his bad side here. And then directly after, he sees a man getting mugged in an alleyway, so he stops it and asks the victim what they should do with him. Leave him for the cops to do nothing, or should they kill him? Harvey is about to flip his coin, and he says heads to let him go or tails to kill him, and since we know Harvey's coin has heads on both sides, it kinda subtly shows that he doesn't really want to kill the guy. But when the homeless man says he's not trying to leave a man's life to chance like that, Harvey says he's right and shoots the guy in the knee to teach him a lesson. He then goes to a former defendant he fought against in court that was able to walk because of Thorne. He's trying to get information on another guy out of him, and he eventually gets it after threatening the man. But the man calls him a freak as he walks away, leading to Harvey beating the dog shit out of him. And as he continues searching, he interrogates a woman to get the location for the man he's looking for. And I like how he gives her money to leave the city instead of more brutal methods. It again shows that even as he's continuing down this dark path, he's still got some moral compass left in him. But Harvey finds the safe house where the man poured acid on his face. He kills 2 of the guards and ties up Zito, saying he's not even a human, he's a cancer that needs to be executed because he's done with second chances. And I love how right before he burns the guy alive to put him through the same amount of suffering as him, he says the other guy may not want to kill you, but I do. In reference to the fact that the good part of himself doesn't want to do this, but the bad part of himself does. But as he gets in his car to drive away, his good side starts to feel regret for what he did, and Batman starts to chase him. But Batman gets thrown off the car and can't chase him any longer. Batman goes back to the Batcave to get some medical attention, but not for long as he feels responsible for what Harvey is doing. He finally accepts what Alfred has been trying to say about the consequences of his actions and the way he can go about handling things. And as Harvey breaks into Thorne's mansion, he is about to kill both him and his son before Batman breaks in and stops him. And I love the moment where he breaks down in emotion after his good side takes over, realizing what he's doing, and how at the end of the episode, Barbara is his lawyer, the person who believes a lot in second chances and being a victim of circumstance. It's just very fitting for what the writing has done for both of these characters. And then to move on to the season finale. Harvey feels like he doesn't deserve help from anyone after what he's done, but Barbara puts his own trick against him and flips his coin to make sure she gets him help, which I think is neat. And moving on to the next scene between them, we see Barbara making her decision after thinking about what her dad said to her and the situation they were put in earlier in the show during episode 7. And that decision is to still put faith in the people of Gotham, even those who may have done a bad thing due to circumstance. She tries to get him a better sentence and some real help at a private hospital, but Harvey still feels like he doesn't deserve it because he was involved in some of the things he'd be talking about and doesn't feel like he deserves a better sentence or help. And I like the moment at the end of this where Harvey's bad side snaps on Barbara after she keeps pushing to help him. Bruce then goes in to talk to Harvey where he echoes a similar sentiment as he did to Barbara. Bruce tries to get Harvey to take the deal and Harvey responds with, "That's not really justice, is it?" And just like Harvey, Bruce's alter ego also comes out in the moment, saying, "Don't start growing a conscience now, Dent," which I really like. Then Harvey gets kidnapped by Flass and Bullock, and he starts playing to their egos as a way to get out. It works, but Barbara follows them and she handcuffs herself to Harvey to make sure he doesn't do anything that will get him killed. But I do have an issue with this part. I don't understand why Thorne doesn't just have Flass and Bullock kill Harvey immediately as opposed to dropping him off with some other guys on his payroll. I think the only defense I can think of for this is maybe Thorne wanted to question Harvey on if they might have said anything or who they might have told, but I don't think that works because later in the episode, Flass and Bullock say kill on sight, implying that Thorne doesn't really care about that and just wants Harvey dead. And I think that also brings up another issue with the fact that one of the goons sees Harvey as they drive by them on the street and doesn't shoot them or do anything for some reason. But that's my only other problem with the show. But anyways, I really like the moment between Batman and Harvey where Harvey is saying him testifying won't even matter because some other monster will just replace Thorne, and Batman gets pissed, rebutting with, "You will testify, Dent, because you don't bend with the world when it goes bad, you push back." And I think there's two ways you can interpret this line of dialogue. One being Batman is saying this so angrily because he still feels responsible for putting Harvey in this situation to begin with, and two, because there's a part of him that still sees Harvey as a criminal who did bad things despite the excuse that can be made for it, because of the earlier scene where he was talking to Harvey in the asylum. But after this, Harvey persists for Barbara to stop trying to help him and trying to get her out of harm's way. A guy spots them and Harvey almost kills the guy until Barbara stops him, and Harvey continues to plead for her to let him go, later saying, "Please go, you can't die for someone like me," because again, he thinks he's a lost cause, but Barbara won't give up on him. But then, as Flass is about to shoot Barbara, Harvey jumps in to save her, sacrificing himself. And then Batman picks up the gun Flass dropped, and pissed, he shoots all the bullets in the gun around him, as he looks at the gun angrily and throws it. I fucking love this scene and how well it touches upon the fact that Batman is still that angry little boy that became the way he is because of people like Flass, especially after coming off the scene that I just talked about earlier with Batman and Harvey. But at the end of the day, Batman still sticks to his moral code and just knocks Flass out. And then in the final scene we get with Batman, this shows the parallel between him and Harvey fantastically, where Batman says he saw something in Harvey when he went over the edge, and Alfred asks, "Something that reminded you of yourself?" As he explains the difference between Harvey and Bruce is that Bruce doesn't lose sight of the thing that keeps him from ending up like Harvey: his humanity. Batman responds with, "4 of us against a never-ending tide, but he'll take those odds." And I love how he finally calls Alfred by his first name rather than Pennyworth, finally accepting and opening people into his life as friends/family. And in the final scene we get with Batman, he throws a batarang right next to Thorne's head to let him know that he'll never stop coming after him. and that is season 1. While I do have a few issues with the show, I still think overall it was very good. I know I didn't talk about literally every little intricate detail about the show. I was mainly just trying to talk about the main stuff, like my favorite stuff that focused on the characters and stuff about the world and stuff. I don't think it's the greatest Batman show ever, but I do think it does feel like a pretty solid spiritual successor to the best Batman show, being Batman the Animated Series. I think most of the plot lines were interesting to follow, and within those plot lines, I really enjoyed the character work for Batman, Barbara, Jim Gordon, and most of the antagonists in the show. I think the animation is solid, the art style is great, the music is really good, the acting is great, the world building and tonal consistency is really good as well. I do think it's a little odd that the show doesn't touch upon things like bigotry for the time period that the show seems to be set in, but it is a fictional universe, and if they don't want to touch on that or explore that, it's completely fine in my book. I just think it could have added another layer to the tone and world building of the show. I would appreciate it if you guys would support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, where you can also get early access to the comic I'm working on. Overall, I'd give the show like an 8.5 out of 10, and I hope they continue it with a bigger budget for the next season. Let me know what you all think about the show in the comments. Don't forget about Disagreement Day. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and yeah.